there has to be something said about the elusive French duo. They come, they make great music, and then they disappear. We all know Daft Punk, the Parisian robots that exploded onto the scene in the 90s and rocked the music world just until their end in 2021. But what about Video Club as well? The duo from Nantes who made banger after banger after banger up until their eventual conclusion again in 2021. But the story I'm bringing you today is of a lesser known group whose talent I can barely articulate into my own words. They were called Paradis. Okay, let's, before anything, get a little bit of background first. Our story begins in 2010 with two people, Simon Meunier and Pierre Rousseau. They met each other in a nightclub in Paris and soon became very close friends. Pierre, in his own words, said it was an amicable love at first sight. They then immediately started making music together, and it was decided between them that they would send in their early demo tapes to Tim Sweeney, who's an American DJ who also operates a label called Beats in Space. Tim replied that same evening to Simon and Pierre's email, giving them an offer to join his label. They accepted, and they had their first release in 2011, their original song, Parfait Tirage, and a cover of Alain Souchon's La Ballade du Gym. Their style immediately captivated listeners with their choice to sing in French rather than in English, which is very non-conformative in the world of house and electronic music. Even Daft Punk sang in English. When asked why, Pierre had this to say about the language choice. We don't really have any opinions on English, really. We just knew that we wanted to integrate voices and use a language that we've mastered. And the language that we mastered the most is French. There wasn't really a choice. The first song that Tim Sweeney listened to wasn't La Ballade du Gym, but Je m'ennuie, a little refrain with very few lyrics in French. When he came to Paris, we had him listen to the cover of Alain Souchon, and it was him that encouraged us to sing in French. It was funny regardless, coming from Tim, who's American. They would have one more release under Beats in Space, 2012's Hémisphère and Je m'ennuie. And in 2013, the duo had begun work on their debut album. Camped out in the Alpine countryside, Simon and Pierre tossed chords back and forth until they came up with an introductory track, the demo for what would become the first track on their upcoming album. Upon returning to Paris, they kept this album energy going. A year would pass and they had a change of label and were signed to Barclay Records, a French label. It was under this label where they would release their first EP titled Couleur Primaire in 2015. This EP featured tracks like Garde-le pour toi, Sur une chanson en français, Du bal des oubliés, and two remixes of the first two tracks done by The Loving Hand and Super Pitcher. After this release, it would finally be time for them to play live. In 2015, they were scheduled to play for an Acme show outside of Paris' Centre Pompidou. And to quote them directly, the idea was to extend our song Garde-le pour toi for more than 45 minutes. Chaos ensued, but we felt we'd surpassed our fears in an unforgettable context. Following the show, they would then join Christine and the Queens and perform as the opening act for their remainder of the tour. Once the tour had ended, however, they soon restarted work on their debut album, and taking inspiration from their first sessions, they chose the Lone Forest in the countryside as their home base. No distractions, just creativity and nature for endless miles. Another year of hard work passes by. The date is now September 16th, 2016. 3 years after the original starting date, their debut album was released, and it was called Recto Verso. Now, let's first start with the title. Recto Verso is a phrase that means both sides, and when diving into this album, you start to understand why they decided on this title. Recto Verso is an album that deals heavily with the theme of duality, and this is mainly the subject that we'll be speaking about in the remainder of this video. Let's jump in. Without even taking any sort of language barrier into consideration, because I didn't speak any French when I first heard this album, you can immediately from the first track, Instantané, hear and pinpoint everything that makes this group, and especially this album, so unique. So captivating. From the synths that grow and evolve as the song moves forward, to Simon's haunting, dreamlike voice, and the undeniable beauty that the French language adds to this genre of music. Now, luckily, if you don't speak French, moving forward I'll be providing you with the adequate translations of everything, so don't worry. Now, the title track, I feel, sets the tone for the rest of this album perfectly. On it, Simon sings about a lover who is pleading with their partner to please open up and to show them all of their sides. This opening verse perfectly sums up the topics that make up a chunk of the album, and what I find to be so beautiful about it is that it does so in a way that uses the least amount of words possible, followed up by the chorus which says, Keep keep these words in mind as we move forward. This sort of imagery will pop up a lot. Oh, and before we move on to the next track, let's not forget about those horns. Garde-le pour toi, or Keep It to Yourself, is a beautiful story of someone coming to terms with a recent breakup, sung in a style that I can only describe as poetic rawness. Maybe there's a term for that, I'm not sure. And it all comes to a head in this absolute banger of a chorus. But let's not skip past the verse directly following this chorus, where he builds off of that final line, rounding out his feelings of wanting to separate himself from his ex-partner, and them not depending on him to admitting that he still thinks about them, and still has that hope inside of him that maybe one day he'll be forgiven. Contradictory, but beautiful as well. But wait a minute, contradictory? Let's highlight that word for a moment and take a look at where this contrast and clash stems from in the first place. It's important to note that both Simon and Pierre are two very different individuals. To quote an article from France TV Info, Simon grew up between Argentina and Lisbon, while Pierre was in between the USA and England. The first prefers down-tempo techno, while the second prefers euphoric techno. Simon himself added, "Paradis is really that zone where two people meet, that little zone where we're able to agree on everything." This is why we have not only thematic contrast, but one of sonics as well, of which you can find on tracks like Toi et Moi, where we mix a funky guitar line beat, reminiscent of Oliver Cheatham's Get Down Saturday Night, with a mellowed out but upbeat synth line that follows just after the chorus, mixed beautifully with the spectral delivery of Simon, who enchants with a story of someone who has trouble expressing their feelings. It's a dance track that infects and makes you move with a groovy rhythm. Or even better, we get the two-track epic of Miroir 1 and Miroir 2. The former opens up with this ghostly fog of a synth that slowly evolves over the course of the track, all while Simon croons about the things and people that don't apply to his life and wanting to make a song that he can see himself in, and in the second chorus, a song that he wants to see himself in. And while the track comes to a close, the synths accelerate, transitioning into Miroir 2, a more fast-paced and danceable continuation of Miroir 1 that feels like a more frustrated version of our narrator in the first song. Only this time, it feels like he succeeded in creating that song that he wants to see himself in. Following this, we have Paradis Reprise, which is the group's cover version of Alain Chamfort's 1981 single of the same name. We're skipping a few songs, so bear with me. And the last track, for now, that I'll touch on, as I feel it's the most important to the album's theme. Where we started with the dreamy Instantané, we end with the much more serious Chacun pour soi, every man for themselves, or every man for himself. This track presents us with two people, wildly different from one another. Sound familiar? The first, an individual who is only limited to the things of their wildest imagination, or as Simon explains it, someone with a childlike wonder who can't really see the truth of anything that's around him. And the second individual is someone who's got their feet firmly locked onto the ground with zero chance of ever floating away from it. A beautiful closer about two people, despite their differences, being a part of the same story and deciding it for themselves. And you see, for the longest time, I had thought that over the course of this album that our narrator was speaking to a lover, or potentially an ex-lover. Now, I'll note that we skipped over the opening track, Instantané, in the beginning, and that was for a reason, because I want to talk to you about it now. Specifically, I want to look at the first verse. This reads to me, and this is 100% speculation by the way, like a recounting of Simon and Pierre's initial meeting. In fact, this whole album reads to me like a love letter to their incredible friendship. A friendship of, like I've mentioned earlier in the video, two wildly different people coming together and making art as one. But unfortunately, not everything lasts forever. After their album release and subsequent tour, the group decided to mutually take a break from Paradis. Pierre had said, by the middle of the tour, by mutual agreement, Simon and I had made the decision that we'd go on an indefinite hiatus. We weren't hearing each other out very well anymore. We still have love for each other nevertheless, but it's a difficult relationship. We're two people with temperaments and points of view which are very different, but we have the advantage of being very complementary when we're synchronized. Our disagreements gave us the power to be incredibly artistically powerful. So, by the end of the tour, I experienced it both as the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. Recto Verso has since been their only LP release. Since the hiatus, Pierre has released 3 albums. 2020's Musique Sans Parole, 2021's Mode par défaut, and the final album in this trilogy, Mémoire de Forme. Later on in an interview, Pierre had this to say about the state of Paradis. I don't consider myself an ex-member of Paradis, more like someone who's part of a group that's not doing a lot in the moment. I've got something to admit to all of you. I've been meaning to make this video since 2020. What you're watching now has been 3 years of back and forth and I'm not sure's, but finally after 3 years of improvement, not limited to the technical skill to be able to make a video like this, but the language skill as well to be able to bring this to a mainly non-French speaking audience. Said it earlier and I'll say it again, I didn't speak French when I heard this album for the first time, but its musicality was enough to move me to the point of wanting to learn a whole new language just so I could understand it more. And again, be able to share the love and appreciation that I have for this work to a wider audience of people who may also love it as much as I do. So thank you so much for watching. It would mean a lot to me if you've left a like on this video if you've enjoyed it so far. And hey, why not click the subscribe button as well to see more videos like this in the future. And one last thank you, which they'll probably never see this video anyway, to Simon et Pierre for creating something so magical. Vous avez changé ma vie avec ça, alors vraiment, merci beaucoup. Anyways, that's it. I know this outro is long-winded, but peace. See you in the next one.